Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. In today's video, I want to talk about my new recording PC. In fact, you are seeing it right next to me right now. I have the glass panel off, because of camera reflections and things like that. But I decided to build a recording PC, and I figure if I'm going to be building something, I may as well record it. So even though the build process is completed, I did record footage of the build process so I could show you in B-roll. And I can also talk about why I decided to build this machine, the components that went into it, and some other information as well. And I'll even talk about the operating system that I chose for this build, which will probably surprise you. And considering that I told you just now that the decision will probably surprise you means you have probably guessed what that decision is already. But we'll leave that for the end of the video. Now, before I go any further, I want to talk about what the recording PC actually is. What's the use case? What do I mean by that? And why did I decide to build a new one? So right now, you are seeing me via my current, soon-to-be old recording PC. And although it's not the only component of my operation, well, obviously I have microphones and cameras as well, I would argue it's the most important component of my setup. It's the heart and soul of how I create content on my channel. Now, when you watch videos on my channel, you primarily see two different scenes. Scene number one is what you're seeing right now. You are seeing me on camera. But then scene number two is actually a recording of the screen of whatever computer I happen to be using. I have two capture cards, one for the camera, and the other is for screen capture, and I switch between the two. And although my current recording PC has been working fairly well, there are some challenges, and my goal right now is to make content creation easier on me so that I spend less time, fiddling with things, fighting with things to try to get things to work, less time doing preparation, and more time creating, actual content. So the idea is basically to upgrade components to make my entire operation easier on myself. And the current stage of this mission has brought me to the recording PC. Now, I mentioned that my recording PC is fine, so why am I building a new one? Well, when I say fine, I mean that I feel like my videos turn out okay. I don't really have any complaints with the end result. Obviously, there's some things I can fix. I could fix the microphone. There's some quirks there. I could definitely fix the lighting. Let's be honest, the lighting isn't all that great. But the recording PC does produce, decent videos. They turn out the way that I want them to. But what you guys don't really see is how much time I spend fighting with it. And part of the problem there is there's a mismatch of components. And what I mean by that when I say mismatch is I'm often recording output from a laptop, which is going to have traditionally a 60 hertz refresh rate or more, but it's going to be at least 60 hertz. And the screen capture device, the USB screen capture device I use for that, maxes out at 30 frames per second. So there's going to be some clipping and some tearing and things like that. Now the thing is, the capture card is seen by the laptop as another display. So when I record laptop footage, I need to mirror the screen. So it's important that the laptop and the capture card support the same resolution and they support the same refresh rate. It's not required by any means. You can certainly get around that, and I do. That's the thing. I get around that, but I don't want to get around that anymore. I want everything to match because I actually have to force GNOME, for example, to use the external monitor, which actually is a capture card, but GNOME sees it, like I mentioned, as another monitor. And I have to, fiddle with the settings. GNOME settings will not allow you to mirror the screen if there's a mismatch. So I go, behind the scenes, there's some XR and R commands I can use. There's other utilities I can use to force it to work. And that's what I do. I record it after I set it up. And you guys see the end result. So you don't really see all the hassle I put into it. But the idea is to make it easier on myself. And that's why I decided to, basically build a brand new recording PC. And the recording PC runs OBS. That's how I switch from one scene to another. And whatever scene I switch to is in the video file. There's only one video file. And then I grab that video file and I edit it. And all of that works fine, but I just want to minimize what I have to do before I hit the record button to get content out to you guys faster. So the idea with this particular build was to have 2 capture cards. And when I say 2 capture cards, I mean internal, because I currently have 2 capture cards right now. They're both USB. There's some limitations with that. I wanted internal capture cards. So already we need a motherboard that has 3 PCIe slots with a decent speed, because I need a GPU and the 2 capture cards. So the available motherboards were, that was narrowed down quite a bit when I start needing 3 PCI slots, which most motherboards have, 1 fast PCIe slot and then 2 slower ones. I wanted the faster PCIe slot on, for each of them. So that's why I went with the motherboard that I went with, and I'll give you a list of the components in just a moment. But right now, it's just to let you guys know what my use case is and why I decided to build a new one, and now you know that. So what I'm going to do right now is talk about the components. So keeping in mind that I wanted a motherboard with 3 PCIe slots, and they need to be a decent speed to support the bandwidth that I need to record multiple streams, that search has brought me to the B550 Master, and that's the motherboard that I decided to go with. It supports AMD CPUs. And for the CPU, I went with the AMD Ryzen 3600X. Now the thing is, I could have went with a faster CPU. This is by no means the fastest you can get. But I didn't really feel like I needed the fastest CPU available. I just need something decent to record with. So already I'm not going to install a Threadripper or anything like that. I just need a CPU that's going to be able to keep up with the video that I'm recording, and that's all I need. And from what I've read, this CPU should do that. And it might even be overkill, since OBS is the only app that I'm running, and I'm only recording. I'm not playing games or anything like that. So it's possible that this CPU is overkill, but I would rather be a little bit overkill than underpowered. So I think this is going to be a good fit. For the capture cards, I went with AverMedia Live Gamer 4K. I wanted capture cards that could capture a 4K resolution at 60 frames per second. I bought 2 of them. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, I have 1 capture card for the camera that's facing me, and then another capture card for desktop or laptop footage when I am doing distribution reviews or tutorials. And in OBS, I switch between them. So I didn't want to use something like an HDMI switcher, which I could have done, but I felt like that would be a little bit of a disruption, because it's essentially the same thing as pulling an HDMI cable out and putting it back in anytime I switch. So I wanted to go with 2 capture cards and have each one dedicated for its intended purpose. And like I mentioned earlier, I didn't want to go with USB capture cards anymore, because there's a serious limit when it comes to bandwidth there. And that does depend on whether you have just 1 USB bus or 2 USB buses. If you have 2 capture cards and you have more than 1 USB bus, you definitely should have them on their own, not both on the same. And that does help, but it only gets you so far. So I wanted something internal, something dedicated, something that was going to work, and I wanted 1 dedicated capture card per purpose. Now for the memory, I just went with 16 gigs of RAM. And I decided to go with Crucial Ballistics, and there really wasn't much consideration I put in there. This isn't a gaming PC. I'm not trying to get the maximum frames when I'm playing online games or anything like that, because I'm not doing that. So I felt like the RAM that I bought, it may not be the best. It's not the worst. I think it'll be fine. 16 gigs of RAM is more than likely going to be fine for this use case. I could have went with 8 more than likely, but I think 16 is the minimum nowadays for me. I don't really think that I'm going to be comfortable with less than that. I think 16 gigs of RAM will be fine, so that's what I decided to go with. Now for the case, I decided to go with the H510 by NZXT. I've had cases from NZXT in the past, and I've always liked them. I've never had any complaints. Honestly, not much consideration went into the case other than, well, it looks cool, and the components that I want to install, they'll fit. But I do feel like I made the right purchase, because it worked out very well for me. The cable management was great, and when I finished building it, you don't really see much of the cabling through the glass panel, which is always a great thing. Because, I mean, if you have a see-through panel and your cable management sucks, then everyone is going to see that, right? So I feel like the case was a good fit for me, and I don't really have any complaints there. It looks cool, it has good cable management, it was easy to set up, and what more can you ask for? Now for the power supply, I did pay a bit of a premium on the power supply. And specifically, the power supply that I purchased is the TX700 by Seasonic. And I'll be the first to admit, I'm not an expert when it comes to power supplies. I wanted something fanless. This is a recording studio, and even though there's a few fans in the case, if I can eliminate a fan, why not? And yeah, I paid a little bit more for that privilege, but again, it's a recording studio, and if I had my way, there'd be no fans on anything. And who knows, maybe I might remove the fans that are in this case right now and go with water cooling or something like that. It's possible, but I think for now, it's fine. But a fanless power supply, it seemed like a great idea to me, and even though it cost a bit of a premium, I was happy to pay it to get rid of that fan. Now for the GPU and the hard disk, I didn't actually purchase anything at all. I had an extra NVMe SSD lying around, so I figured I would just reuse what I already had. For the GPU, the reason I didn't purchase anything was solely because I wasn't able to purchase anything. Like many of you, I'm having trouble buying GPUs nowadays. I wanted to go with a new GPU, everything else in the case is new, except for the hard drive, but I really wasn't able to find anything. So I had an NVIDIA 1050 Ti lying around that I purchased years ago, so I figured I would give this a shot and see if it's good enough for the task. It doesn't require a power lead, and it seems to be more of an entry-level card, but if it works, then that's one less thing that I have to purchase. So now we get to the OS. Now, my first choice was Ubuntu Mate. I was actually running that on a previous recording PC for quite some time, and it seemed like a really good fit, so that's what I decided to install. But the problem is the AverMedia capture cards, they don't actually support Linux at all. So Ubuntu Mate with OBS was completely unable to see the fact that there's capture cards installed on the motherboard at all. So unfortunately, I had to go with Windows, and that's what I installed. And going into this, I kind of figured that this might be the case. This might be what everything leads to, because capture cards are notoriously not Linux friendly. And it's not the fault of Linux, it's just negligent vendors. They just don't care, and they just don't make the specifications available to people that can write the drivers. So it's a challenge for everyone. So I figured I would try a Linux distribution first, and if that didn't work, I would go with Windows. Windows is always my last resort. It's never my first choice, and I did legitimately give Ubuntu Mate a try. It didn't work out, so for right now, I'm running Windows, unfortunately. And the fact that I installed Windows on this rig made me second guess whether or not I should even do this video at all, because this is a Linux channel, and here I just built a Windows machine. But the thing is, I feel that there's an important point to be made here, and I get an opportunity to let you guys know what my mindset is, generally speaking, because it's not something that I talk about too often. Now, like I mentioned, I always consider Linux first. It's my go-to. It's my number one choice. And currently, this recording PC is the only thing running Windows in my arsenal right now, and it doesn't really bother me, to be honest, because the whole point is I want to make Linux videos for you guys. That's what my channel is, obviously. And if I have to run Windows to do that right now, then I guess I will. Now, if Linux does support these capture cards at some point, then I will wipe this machine and put Linux on it. But for right now, I have content that I need to make. So I don't want to force something to work with Linux that isn't intended to work with Linux. I'll do whatever I can to make that happen, but at a certain point, it comes down to the fact that I want to get some work done, and if Linux isn't going to support something, then unfortunately I just can't use it. Now, like I mentioned, Linux is my number one choice. It's my favorite platform. I mean, I love it so much, I created an entire YouTube channel around it. But we need to talk about the fact that there's this mindset that you should always be using Linux, but the fact is, the reality is, Linux doesn't always work for every use case. And if someone is, forcing people or strongly encouraging people to use Linux, out of blind devotion, even when it doesn't make sense to use Linux and Linux doesn't work for that use case, you're actually doing harm. You are trying to get someone to run Linux knowing that they're probably not going to have a great experience for their use case. And I feel like that's doing a disservice to the community. So if I came at you guys and scolded you for using Windows and scolded you for using Mac, I would be doing a disservice to the community. You should never do that. You should let people use whatever they want. I'm not one to preach, but the fact of the matter is, sometimes, as much as I hate to admit it, Linux doesn't work for some things, and that's okay. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Because when it comes to computing, there's no such thing as an operating system that works for every use case. There's a reason why we have Linux, Windows, and Mac. I don't want Linux to dominate Windows and dominate Mac, because that would create a monopoly, the very thing that we're trying to fight against. The fact is, depending on your use case, you will end up using whatever operating system is best for that use case. And this situation is no different. Now, to be fair, I really don't like using Windows. And I'm not coming down on anyone for liking Windows. It's just a personal opinion. It doesn't resonate with me personally. I just don't happen to like the way that it's set up. But that's just a personal opinion. I choose not to use Windows if I can help it. But in this situation, there was no other option. I want to make content for you guys, and capture cards, well, they just don't make drivers for Linux. The vendors don't make drivers for Linux, so it is what it is. Now, if anyone is curious why I don't like Windows and why it doesn't resonate with me, one of the things that I don't like about it is the fact that they try to kind of force things on you a little bit. And I'll fully admit that maybe I'm taking this out of context, or maybe I'm over-exaggerating this, but while I was installing Windows on this machine, I was reminded of some of the quirks that I really don't like. For example, during the installation process, it made it clear that they really want me to use a Microsoft account. And this isn't really an anti-Microsoft thing, because I don't even care what operating system it is. I don't even care if it's Linux. I don't want to be forced or strongly encouraged to associate any ID to any company with my operating system. In my mindset, this computer is an appliance. That's all it is. It's supposed to just run OBS. That's it. But Microsoft is trying to make it more of a personal experience with a Microsoft account. And I'm sure the Microsoft account thing is, totally awesome for a lot of you. A lot of you might like it. And there's definitely some features there that could add value for someone who wants those features. But I had to disconnect the network cable just to trick it into giving me the option that's otherwise hidden to create a local user account. And I just don't feel like Microsoft should go to that extent to try to encourage you to create a Microsoft account. It's totally fine for them to ask you, hey, do you want to do this? And then you say, no, thank you. That's fine. But they might have fixed it in a newer version of the Windows installer. I'll admit that the one that I have is a little old, but I remember from all the videos where I show you guys how to do something on Windows, I have to disconnect the network cable just to have the privilege of creating a local user account. After installation was done, I reconnected the network cable because it's time to install drivers and updates. The usual things that people do when they first set up a computer. So as soon as I connected a network cable, it brought up another screen trying again to get me to sign in to a Microsoft account. I don't want to do that. I said no less than 15 minutes ago. So there's some quirks there. And also during the installation process, there's all these things that I had to turn off for all the telemetry that I didn't want. So Microsoft is really trying to make some money here. And honestly, I don't really mind that, because this is for a business case. This computer, this recording PC, the use case is for business purposes. So even if they wanted like $30 or something extra to turn all this off, I would gladly pay it. I have no problem giving them money if I have to, but they don't actually give you access to the non-telemetry versions of Windows unless you buy a volume license. And I guess that's my main complaint about Windows 10, is that you should be able to purchase a non-telemetry version of Windows 10 if you decide to. If you actually don't want the telemetry, if you don't mind paying for it, they should give you the option, but they really don't. But they're really selective over who they do give that option to. But don't get me wrong, I'm not judging anyone that likes Windows or anything like that. I'm sure signing into a Microsoft account might add value to some of you. It's just not my thing. And minor quirks aside, it is what it is. So I have spent some time actually testing this recording PC out, and so far, it looks like it's going to meet my needs. It's going to do what I need it to do. Now, to be fair, what I need it to do isn't all that complicated. I just want multiple capture cards, and I want to capture footage from those cards via OBS. So it's not really a complicated ask that I'm asking for here. But if I do run into some trouble, I'll let you guys know, but I don't think I'm going to, because so far everything seems fine. And in the future, I'll just try Linux again. And if it gets to a point where the capture cards are supported by Linux, then I will, switch it over and I'll make a video about it. But, the important takeaway here is, twofold. First of all, you guys have asked several times, like, what are you using to record your videos and things like that? And well, here's part of that answer. Obviously, the camera and microphone come into the picture as well, but we could talk about that stuff on another video. But I think I've answered that question. But also to drive home the point that we need to really stop blindly forcing Linux in situations where it doesn't fit. Like I said, I'll try Linux first. If it works, great. If it doesn't, then I'll go to something else. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I mentioned earlier, different operating systems, they're usable in different use cases. They all have their pros and cons. Nothing is 100%. That's just the way that computing is. And that's a reality that we have to accept. Now, I'm going to be using this PC to record all the new footage that you'll be seeing on this channel. Now I have a ton of videos that I've already filmed with the current recording PC, this one included. And after all of these are edited and sent out the door, you'll start to see new content on the new PC. So if you notice any improvements of any kind, I hope you do, then it's going to be because, well, I'm using the new recording PC now. So there you go. And that'll probably happen, I'm assuming, this May of 2021. I should run out of footage by the end of this month, and I'll have to record some new footage here pretty soon, and you'll start to see it in May. So what do you guys think about my recording PC, my opinions on Linux in general, the things that I've mentioned in this video? Let me know. Drop me some comments in the comments section down below, and make sure you click that like button if you like this video. That lets YouTube know that you want to see more content just like this. Subscribe if you haven't already done so. Again, I have a ton of videos coming. I have a hard drive full of content that I'm going through editing right now. So there's some really cool things coming. So make sure you subscribe. Anyway, thanks for watching.